How do you know someone is not a narcissist? As a therapist, one of the most important parts of diagnosing isn't just figuring out what someone has, it's ruling out what they don't have. When I'm assessing for narcissistic personality disorder, I'm not only looking for traits that match the criteria, I'm also looking for indicators that tell me that this person probably does not qualify for the diagnosis. Before I get into the 5 signs that would tell me that someone is unlikely to have narcissistic personality disorder, I want you to know a few things. First, there's a lot of nuance here. There are going to be exceptions to these signs. I know that. It requires an enormous amount of clinical judgment and having a lot of history about their different behaviors and patterns over time. That being said, I want to give you 5 indicators or 5 signs that I pay attention to that help guide me toward thinking, you know what, this person is unlikely to have narcissistic personality disorder. So that being said, let's dive in. Sign number 1, they have stable relationship patterns. People with narcissistic personality disorder usually have a long history of broken friendships, chaotic relationships, fallouts, grudges, ongoing conflicts that repeat across different stages of their life. When I see someone with mostly stable, healthy relationships, especially with the people that they're closest to, the people that they have attachments to, that's often a strong sign against NPD. Now, I get it. Some people can put up a facade, have friendships, put up a good front because people with narcissistic personality disorder can often be charismatic and charming. From the outside, it may look like there are very few issues. But when you're doing a clinical assessment and you actually get history and you evaluate the patterns, you start to see, oh, okay, well, there's a history of broken and damaged relationships here. So generally speaking, stable relationship patterns, especially with the people that they're closest to, is going to be an indicator that this person is unlikely to have narcissistic personality disorder. However, it's also important to assess how bad is their bad. What I mean by that is, in their worst moments or relationships, what are they like? If they're not really using any manipulative tactics, maybe they just raise their voice from time to time or something like that at their worst, that's not an indicator that they have narcissistic personality disorder. However, if their worst of the worst is that they put a great facade on for other people, but in their closest dynamics, they are really horrendous to the people who care about them and love them, that's a different story. You also want to know the duration, how many people they have done this to, because this requires a lot of nuance and clinical judgment here. You want to know how bad the bad is and for how long did the bad last for. That's important because narcissistic personality disorder is a personality disorder, meaning that it has to be across multiple years. It cannot be something like, well, they treated somebody poorly when they were 19, so that means that they are a narcissist. That's not necessarily the case. With a personality disorder, it's long-lasting, enduring patterns. It's generally not a one-time thing. We're talking about patterns that show up in their 20s, their 30s, their 40s, and beyond. It's pervasive across time and across different relationships. So the indicator is, if mostly they have stable relationship patterns, I would have a hard time diagnosing somebody with narcissistic personality disorder, especially if you're able to understand that they're not masking or putting up a facade. Sign number 2, how they view others. People who have narcissistic personality disorder usually see people in this absolute hierarchy of status. They see people as completely above them or beneath them, depending on status, usefulness, or what a person is able to do for them. It's almost like they're constantly ranking people in their mind, constantly evaluating who's worth their time and who isn't based on what that person can provide for them. When someone shares that they view humans as inherently equal, that people have different strengths and different weaknesses, but basically that people have the same human worth, that is very unlike narcissistic personality disorder. Whether you agree with that worldview or not, if somebody were to have that viewpoint on life and really carry that belief, again, not somebody being performative, but somebody actually carrying that belief system, then you would know, okay, well, that is not really an indicator of narcissistic personality disorder. People with NPD almost see life as 100% always a competition at all costs. It's almost like an eat or get eaten type of mentality. They tend to view relationships as transactional. They're constantly evaluating, what can this person do for me? How does this person make me look? Does this person elevate my status, or do they bring it down? So what tends to happen when someone views others on an inherently equal basis is a much more cooperative environment. They tend to be more empathetic, a bit less judgmental. Those sorts of things go along with that philosophy of life. They can genuinely celebrate other people's successes without feeling threatened by them. They can also be around someone who's much more successful or has more status without feeling like that diminishes them in some type of way. I would also pay close attention to how they talk to people who are in service positions. Waiters, cashiers, customer service representatives. How do they treat people who have, maybe in their minds, nothing to offer them in terms of status or advantage? That can be really telling. Someone who treats everyone with basic dignity and respect, regardless of what that person can do for them, is showing me something very different from narcissistic personality disorder. Sign number 3, how they treat vulnerable animals. I know this can be a little controversial, so I want to clarify some nuances here. I don't just mean dogs or cats. I mean small, vulnerable animals. Frogs, lizards, rabbits, birds, anything that cannot give them status or paint them as good or give them anything back in return. If someone has a consistent long-term history of empathy and care toward living creatures, that tells me a lot. Now, I get it. Some people can be extremely nice to animals and extremely cruel to humans. I fully understand that. And again, this requires a lot of nuance because it's almost like, how do they treat small animals when nobody else is watching? That's almost the key factor here. And that is so difficult to get a read on in clinical judgment because how do you find that out, right? But if you were to find that out, it's kind of a big indicator of something that would help me rule this out. If this person is quite empathetic toward vulnerable animals, and especially towards animals or even humans that cannot give them anything in return, that again tells me a lot. The reason this matters is because it speaks to a capacity for empathy that extends beyond what's socially expected or what benefits them. It's one thing to be kind to people who can reciprocate or who are watching. It's another thing entirely to show care and concern for a creature that has no social capital, that can't tell anyone how good you are, and that can't do anything for you. This also extends to how they treat people who are vulnerable or who are in need. Do they have genuine compassion for people who are struggling? Can they feel moved by someone else's pain even when that person is a stranger? These are the kinds of things that tell me someone has a depth of empathy that's inconsistent with narcissistic personality disorder. Sign number 4, their ability to apologize and repair. This is a very, very important one. Again, this kind of goes back to the stable relationships. If somebody's actually genuinely good at apologizing and repairing, and I want to clarify what an apology is not just, I'm sorry for what I did. I mean, that's not bad. It's a good start. But a good apology tends to consist of 4 different parts. You apologize for what you did. You acknowledge how it hurt the other person and why it hurt them. And most importantly, then there's a changed behavior. A true apology cannot happen in the moment. It usually takes time to know if it's a true apology or not. What ends up happening is somebody who has narcissistic personality disorder is going to be much more prone to these immature behaviors of not taking responsibility, projecting, deflecting blame, things like that. They can also engage in manipulative tactics like gaslighting. So if someone can take responsibility, reflect on their impact, apologize without defensiveness, and actually change their behavior, that's a huge indicator against narcissistic personality disorder. Let me give you an example of what this looks like in practice. Someone who doesn't have narcissistic personality disorder might say something like, "I'm sorry I snapped at you earlier. I know that was hurtful and it probably made you feel like I don't value what you have to say. Yes, I was stressed, but that's no excuse. I'm going to work on managing my stress better so I don't take it out on you anymore." And then you see them actually working on that. You see them catching themselves. You see them making different choices. Compare that to someone with narcissistic traits who might say, "I'm sorry you felt hurt," which isn't really an apology at all. Or they might apologize but then turn it around. "I'm sorry I snapped, but you know how stressed I've been and you kept pushing me." That's not taking responsibility. That's just deflecting. The ability to sit with the discomfort of having hurt someone, to really acknowledge it without making excuses, and then put in the work to change, that requires a level of emotional maturity and empathy that someone with narcissistic personality disorder typically doesn't have. They're much more likely to protect their ego than genuinely repair a relationship. Sign number 5, their capacity for self-reflection. This is really important. Generally, someone who actually has this diagnosis has an extremely hard time self-reflecting or acknowledging how their actions are impacting others or how their behavior comes across to other people. They're usually entrenched in almost always believing that they're in the right and that they're never in the wrong. If they have the capacity to admit that they make mistakes, that they really do, and they reflect not just one time but several times, and it's not like a performative self-reflection like, "Oh, I'm so good, I'm the greatest self-reflector of all time." But if it comes from really examining their own behaviors, looking inward, questioning their actions, analyzing their thoughts, acknowledging that they have a bit of a dark side, that their perspectives could be wrong, that they question it, they analyze it, that tells me that they have a lot of capacity for self-reflection. Also, if they can reflect on, what are my values? What type of person do I really want to be? What do I really want to get out of life? What kind of person do I want to be with other humans? That would tell me a lot. If somebody comes in during a clinical assessment and they talk about gaining insight and self-awareness and growth, I think that would be rare for someone like that to have narcissistic personality disorder. When somebody's trying to understand their patterns, that tells me that they have a lot of emotional flexibility. Someone with narcissistic personality disorder typically lacks that capacity for self-reflection and emotional flexibility. When it comes to self-reflection, what I'm really looking for is someone who can hold multiple perspectives at once. They can think, "Okay, I see it this way, but I can understand why someone else might see it differently. Maybe I'm wrong about this." That kind of mental flexibility, that willingness to question yourself, that's something that is not typically seen in narcissistic personality disorder. I also look at whether someone can recognize patterns in their own behavior. Can they say, "I've noticed that I tend to shut down when I feel criticized," or "I realize that I have a hard time with confrontation and I need to work on that." That kind of self-awareness is huge. It means they're paying attention not just to what's happening around them, but to their own internal processes and how those affect others. So those are 5 signs or indicators that tell me someone is unlikely to have narcissistic personality disorder. That's it for today's video. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you, and see you in the next one.